5 or 6 CEOs control every block that Bitcoin mines today.
And so questionably, some of those CEOs might be controlled by one CEO.
Yes. Our inspiration to relaunch Ocean came from this really firm belief that mining at the pool level is extremely centralized, and it's an impediment for growth, and it's a risk to the system.
In my opinion, it's probably the largest risk left. The last argument that could be made.
Right.
This pool centralization that I see as an attack surface.
The main motivation here is censorship resistance. But in order to be censorship resistance, you have to look different. Like, you can't all be running the same thing with the same policy, because if you shut one down, then you're shutting them all down.
It's an interesting take. It really is. And I think this really goes back to Satoshi's vision, which was one CPU, one vote.
In the early days, if you wanted to mine, you could just use your CPU power to mine the local mempool that you were creating. And if you got lucky, you would win 50 Bitcoins.
Yeah.
And that quickly turned into 25 Bitcoins. And in that process, the probability of you getting any money was drastically declining. That quickly turned into enterprise operations where miners had big electric bills. The idea of joining a pool became almost mandatory. We quickly went from a lot of solo mining to a lot of pools and barely any solo mining.
Our data center we're in the domain response curtailment program. One of my data centers, we're doing a lot of mining. We'll get a lot of notifications, and it'll be like, hey, just be aware that this might happen, which is that like your N+2, and then
maintaining the grid is like maintaining an airplane when it's in the air, right? So they're constantly taking off elements in order to do like scheduled maintenance, and those have consequences of creating hotspots on the grid. It sounds like this is contracted demand response. So this is a great tool. The load shedding equivalent back in my day was flipping a breaker at a 44,000 volt station and taking off a town, basically.
Gotcha. Wow.
That is like, do that to prevent a blackout. But this is definitely more proactive.
Oh yeah.
And this is the reason why Bitcoin mining is God's gift to utility operators.
Yeah. Guys, today I'm here with Mark Artymko, the president and co-founder of Ocean. Mark has a diverse and extensive background in the energy sector, particularly in the electrical grid operations and management. He has held various roles at major companies such as Hydro One and ITC Holdings Corp. He transitioned into Bitcoin and cryptocurrency through a company called Dynamic Mining, and recently he's transitioned as the president and co-founder of Ocean, Bitcoin mining pool company. So with that being said, welcome.
Thanks, Maddie. Pleasure to be here.
So tell me a little bit about your transition from being in energy to cryptocurrency.
Yeah, so I spent around 18 years of my life basically sinking my teeth into the utility grid operations. Started with a large company out of Ontario, Canada, so born and raised in Canada, and as an electrical engineer, and did a lot of the preliminary design work for substations and transformer stations at the engineering level. And then I went on to work in construction and build the actual stations. And we're talking like really, really high voltage, 500,000 volt, 200 kV stations, the kind that power like cities. And then over into operations. So I really sank my teeth into different facets and really learned a lot about how energy is managed at the grid level, and how outages are responded to. I think probably the most eye-opening stint of that 18-year career was working in the grid control room in Barrie, Ontario. So think of like a NASA control room for space stations, but instead of ships, you had electrons, right? So like all of the electricity in the entire province sort of being, monitored and managed in real time, and the level of coordination that goes on the fact that these lights are on right now is like there are thousands and thousands of people looking at monitors, making that, keeping the frequency at 60 hertz and doing contingency analysis all day long, and going through thousands of what if scenarios to preemptively reorganize the grid so that we never lose power.
Wow, that's fascinating.
So yeah, that was eye opening, and part of that process was was dealing with the interconnection of loads and generators and connection assessments and stability studies and thermal studies and the process of bringing on new loads like Bitcoin miners or new generators is very complex. And I got a front row seat to see all of that. And I had actually moved from Ontario to Michigan. My wife is American from Naples, Florida, where we are today. Probably one of the best cities in the world.
I couldn't agree more.
Right. So, and I transitioned over to ITC, like you mentioned. So much more of the same, but always a focus on the interconnectivity of loads. And I was exposed to Bitcoin mining through this
Demand response, maybe.
It was. It wasn't through demand response. It was kind of like in the middle of COVID, and I had been learning more about Bitcoin, and there was an opportunity with a startup where they were looking for somebody with a bit more of an energy background to kind of like take the reins, and that's when Bitcoin, like everybody was getting into Bitcoin. ASICs were, retailing for $10,000-$12,000, right?
Those crazy S19s
were right in the boom there.
I saw 14,000, 15,000 even.
Yeah. So I joined that company and was pursuing a lot of mining as a service type deals. With my energy background, I really saw an opportunity to try to capture some of the stranded energy in renewables, wind farms and solar farms. And there was a lot of interest there, because behind the scenes, these energy companies are deploying alternative resources to make more money and to capitalize on stranded assets. So you think of like batteries and hydro pumping towers, pump the water up to the top of the tower when the electricity's cheap, and then let it ride down when it's expensive.
That's really the way to store kinetic energy. That always been fascinating by
storage.
That,
The grid has been adopting storage as a technology to solve issues of stability and power availability, and I just saw Bitcoin mining as no different than that. And so going to a solar operator and saying, hey, instead of buying that battery, just look into this fake internet money over here, and you can actually, call Bitcoin, and you could be the guy that's actually making it. And there was actually quite a lot of interest. Unfortunately, the timing wasn't great. So Bitcoin pretty much overnight went from 60,000 to 14 or 15,000.
Yeah.
And so a lot of that interest dried up. But that sort of that was sort of my entrance into the space. And it wasn't too long ago. I've been very fortunate to come up to speed with some OGs in the space. And along the way, I met Luke Dastier through a family connection, and became friends with Luke. And then, a year later, we started this company together.
I've always been fascinated. You touched on this idea of Bitcoin as this like energy storage device, right? And you think about money itself, it's almost like, your life's energy that you pour into money, right? You're compensated for your life's energy with money. And Bitcoin is almost like this giant energy money. It's there's a lot of interesting philosophical rabbit holes you could go down with that. But when we tie it back into this tool on the grid, and you mentioned that you've been in these control rooms, that's just, looking at the grid as a whole. Did you start to see any of this concept of Bitcoin as this demand response tool, like being in that room, like, hey, we've got, 500 megawatts, whatever, in our back pocket that we can turn off if there's an emergency? Did you get to see any of that when you were there? Or is that something that really has been evolving just over the past 1 or 2, 3, 4 years?
So when I was in the control room, I didn't make the connection to Bitcoin as a really good utility, or mining as a utility for demand response. My first exposure was, I was sort of in charge of the key account management group at Hydro One, and this is the group that helps basically onboard all new customers, loads. They're called loads in the utility world, but they're basically just consumers that use electricity and generators, and manage those relationships and help deal with fallouts from outages and remediation plans, and pretty much overnight there's a slew of new type of, potential customer that were exploring Bitcoin mining in Ontario. And they were very different because most customers want dual supply because reliability is key. It's king always. And then this type of customer would come onto the scene and say, like, we don't care about dual supply. We'll go on a radial feeder. We just want cheap energy. And that was sort of my first exposure to Bitcoin mining in the grid. The fact that the thing that's the most important to every other customer is not even a concern at all whatsoever for these Bitcoin miners.
We're kind of like this perfect customer, right?
It's like, if anybody from the utility is listening or watching, Bitcoin mining is the perfect customer you've been dreaming of your entire life, because you can shut it down on a radial feeder and it has minimal impact to the operations and the profitability. But over on the grid side for demand response, the demand response has always been layers, and utilities have to have a series of contingency plans in place. So as load grows and slowly gets added, everybody wakes up at 6 a.m. and fires on their morning coffee machines. Demand goes up. You need extra generation. So there is generation that's earmarked for load growth, and then there's generation that's earmarked for what happens if there's a 800 megawatt nuclear facility in your region that goes offline. Like every region has to have enough local resources to be able to make up for that within seconds. And if not, they have to buy it from their neighbors. But if you rely on your neighbors heavily, you get penalized. And one of the contingencies, or one of those backup plans, is load shedding, which is kind of like an emergency, or a voluntary demand response. So demand response traditionally has been, we're going to brown you out, or we're going to shut it off so that we can traditional grid operations, the grid operator supplements more generation to keep up with demand. And I think for the first time in history, you have a customer who is willing to go down for the sake of a more beneficial cost of electricity. So
and we're talking megawatts of power, right?
Megawatts of power. This is like in my world, a 10 megawatt customer is a pretty large customer. So you can have, go ahead.
I'm going to read you because our data center we're in the demand response curtailment program at one of my data centers. We're doing a lot of mining. And I'm going to read you what they sent me. And I'm just curious, what your thought is, being on the other side. Like, why do they need to do this? What was the logic, as opposed to sometimes it might be an emergency, sometimes it's conflict plans. But I think with us, they gave us, 30 to 60 minutes of a heads up. They kind of said, and I'll read it out loud. Duke Energy Carolinas Power Share mandatory notification to curtail load. This is your official notification that Duke Energy Carolinas is initiating a power share mandatory event due to forecasted system conditions. The mandatory event will begin at 4 p.m. and is scheduled to end at 10 p.m. You should curtail load in accordance with your power shore contract during this event. And then, they kind of just did a follow-up and basically said that, hey, we're starting and you can resume now that it's over. What are your thoughts on that? How were they able to give us such advance notice? Was it just in case something happened? Was it because they anticipated some problem or some nuclear reactor was going down or something? Maybe you can tell me, being on the other side.
Yeah. So there's something called a contingency analysis tool that all of the grid operators, Duke Energy has one. They all have one. And they look at an N-1 and sometimes an N-2 scenario. And so they have powerful computers that are cycling through thousands of what if scenarios constantly. Like every second they're running iterations. And they're looking at will the if this bad thing happens, like if this if this generator trips offline, or this high voltage circuit, if lightning strikes it and it goes offline, what is the load? What's the load going to do? Where's the electricity going to flow? And they look for a few bad things. They look for thermal overloads. So the heat that's going through the transformers and over the lines are bad. Like transformers can blow up, and lines, if they're overloaded, they can sag and like hit a house or hit a tree. So they're looking for that. They're looking for stability, right? So we run on 3-phase power in North America here, pretty much all over the world, and 3-phase power is a delicate thing, and if the phases aren't equally spaced, that you can have like power swings, and the whole system can bust up. So they're looking at it was probably a hot day. It's pretty hot down here now.
So we'll get a lot of notifications. It'll be like, hey, just be aware that this might happen, which is that like your N+2 and then
that, so that what's happening is like the grid is like, maintaining the grid is like maintaining an airplane when it's in the air, right? Mm-hmm. So they're constantly taking off elements in order to do like scheduled maintenance, and those have consequences of creating hotspots on the grid. Mm-hmm. And so that is always sort of like an evolving beast, and so the remediation for those things are either bring on more generation, or in some cases, if it's like localized, you don't have the availabilities to do that. So it sounds like from what you read, this is contracted demand response. So this is a great tool. Like when I was in the control center, there weren't a lot of contracted demand responses that we had to sort of handle. The load shedding I was referring to was like, catastrophic. If there was a contingency, you're dumping loads. So the fact that they're giving you a heads up, it sounds like they've sort of baked this right into the plan. Yeah. And this is, and you probably, we're eligible for a reduced electricity rate.
Yeah, there's a financial incentive there, which is no problem.
How often does it happen, by the way?
I would say you do get a lot of notifications that something potentially might happen. But I would say very minimally where it actually does happen, where you actually have to curtail. But if it was often, it wouldn't be a problem, right? Because as miners, we can very easily just, go flip the breaker, shut everything down. And
so if this is a hypothetical heads up, we might need to. Yeah. What they're saying is, if the circuit trips or if we hit a thermal overload here, our manual intervention is going to be to flip this breaker, or in your case, ask this customer to bring down the load voluntarily.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, when you were sitting in the control room, we didn't really have this tool of like, say, I've got, 50 megawatts available in this county, 100 megawatts over here, where I can just, send out a text message notification and shut them down. That wasn't really, I know I've got these miners and these miners. That wasn't really a tool for you when you were there. Or?
Yeah, no, it was more like crude. I would say. Okay. Like it was like the load shedding equivalent back in my day was flipping a breaker at a 44,000 volt station and taking off a town, basically.
Gotcha. Wow.
That is like, do that to prevent a blackout. But this is definitely more proactive. Oh yeah. And this is the reason why Bitcoin mining is God's gift to utility operators. Yeah. It's because you can send out notifications and give folks minutes of heads up. And if we had this tool at our disposal back when I was in the control room, I think it would have saved a lot of heartache, because this is it's voluntary, and you've kind of agreed to these terms in the rate through the rate that you qualified for.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I would go so far as to even, if there was a rate that could say, hey, I would give them control to shut it down themselves whenever they need on a moment's notice.
Oh yeah.
60 seconds, shut off all the machines, something like that. Even. Sure. So it seems like there's even more potential to get even more, particular with a plan like this, give them even more control to protect and keep the grid safe for people.
Yeah. I think utilities really, really need to take a closer look at Bitcoin mining. Yeah. I know where I live in Michigan, there's two major utilities, load serving entities, and they both qualified for an extremely low rate. Mm-hmm. I don't know what it is here, but like 4.3 cents.
That's pretty good
per kilowatt hour.
That's fantastic.
But to qualify, you need to be like a really large load, like 50 megawatts or greater. The company on the east side of the state, DTE, made this available to all of their customers. right? And the company on the west side made it available to everybody except Bitcoin miners.
That's so silly.
So they excluded one.
Probably the biggest participant.
Yeah.
It just doesn't make any sense.
And it just shows that, they see it as a volatile industry.
That is just
right. And part of the consideration too is in these regulated utilities, they the way that they pay for capital upgrades to the grid that serves your load is they're counting on future revenue that they're receiving from you. Right. So it may cost $5 million for them to upgrade a station to serve your 10 megawatt load or 50 megawatt load. And they're counting on you paying your electric bill for the next 15 years to pay it off. And they do like a DCF analysis, and they calculate the net present value of your future 15 years worth of rates. And if your NPV exceeds the cost of upgrades, then you don't actually pay anything. It's like free to connect essentially.
Yeah.
But if you go bust in 2 years and you're like, you go bankrupt,
which makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Which happens to Bitcoin miners. So I think that the industry is so new. And then that's
the more the utilities understand the benefits here, the better rates they could give to keep their customers in business. I think it just makes sense. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. It's all about it and its risk profile.
Yeah.
So they see it like a mining operation, even a gold mining operation is a much higher risk than a town who's adding a new transformer station because they have economic growth. So those two things don't get treated equally at the utility level. The miners, the gold miners and the Bitcoin miners get treated more harshly with lower risk tolerance. But tying it back to the President Trump's announcement and Senator Lummis' announcement about wanting to create a strategic reserve, that should give, I think, and I hope, confidence to the utility operators that Bitcoin is not a fleeting industry, and that mining is they should be able to take some confidence and use a lower risk profile on mining.
I totally agree with you, and I think it's obvious at this point that things are here to stay.
Yeah,
this is not going away. We've got presidents talking about this. We've got major huge companies like MicroStrategy adding it as a reserve asset on their balance sheet, and we do have I would say over a decade now of high level or companies mining and growing, and sure a lot of these utility companies have seen the benefits of that, and it's obvious, right? I mean, all the things we've discussed and talked about. And I've had conversations with higher ups at these different utilities. I'm sure you have as well. And, some of them have been frustrated, right? About, hey, we hear you, I agree with you. I see this benefit, but, it's like we're this huge, slow moving utility. And it's like, it's a challenge, and
they move at a turtle's pace.
That's exactly what was said, right? To me by some higher ups at different utilities, right? I'm not going to throw any names out there, but
for sure.
Off the record conversations. Yeah. No doubt about that at all. How do you see, and we touched on it a little bit, but, you're uniquely positioned for coming from the energy side of things. Let's talk a little bit about, green energy and Bitcoin mining and why there's such a natural partnership there, and why Bitcoin mining itself is really pushing forward and promoting a lot of these green energies, whether it be wind or solar, et cetera.
Yeah. I have a lot of, I guess my background with green energy dates back so far to the Ontario days, and I have mixed feelings about it. The standard line I've heard in Bitcoin is that Bitcoin will seek out, or Bitcoin mining always seeks out the cheapest form of energy, and because green energy is the cheapest form of energy, it's just a natural fit, and the two will meet. And that may be true now. When you factor in things like flare gas mining and like reducing flaring through emissions, and are you getting some feedback?
I am getting some feedback. What is that, Paul?
We're filming from an airport.
Filming from an airport office that overlooks the runway. So,
literally, we can touch the
yes. So I guess a jet is taking off.
Yeah. So if the logic is there, if you can capture wasted energy. Like think of a solar or a wind farm that's generating at 95% of its capacity because the grid doesn't have enough thermal capacity to accept the last 5%. Mm-hmm. They're literally just wasting. Like they have the equipment on site and they're just wasting it
or whatever,
or they're not generating it in the first place. Yeah. So that extra 5% would probably be really cheap, right? And it would be the lowest cost. And because Bitcoin miners are so mobile and flexible, they can go to these remote regions in rural America and rural Canada and soak up that low hanging fruit. So I think there's a lot of truth, but my background with green energy goes back to like the early 2000s, and it was a completely different experience because it was green by decree essentially. So in like 2000-ish, the Premier of Ontario was Dalton McGuinty, and he enacted the Green Energy Act, which basically was the designed removal of all fossil fuel generation in Ontario at a very aggressive pace. Wow. So they had millions of people in the province, and most of those were concentrated in Ontario, and one of the largest coal-fired power plants in Ontario was in Toronto. And so taking away that power source would cripple the city. So there was a lot of development on the grid side to add transformation to get power from like nuclear facilities into the city. My first job I ever worked on was the construction of a 750 megawatt transformer station that cost $150 million. And it was, the power was there sort of like circulating Toronto, but they couldn't get it into the city because the transformation wasn't there. And so we spent $150 million to build this huge transformer station just so that they could close the coal-fired station in the city. So very, very expensive. And all of that $150 million, as it always is with the utilities, was socialized to the ratepayers equally.
So
everybody paid their fair share of that. So that there's that cost and all of the other projects to update the grid, to upgrade the grid. But also on the generation side, because it was such a new technology, there wasn't really a competitive market for green energy. And so some of the earliest contracts in Ontario were basically enticing. It was called the feed-in tariff program, FIT. And so they were awarding long-term contracts for wind farms, started off wind and then solar. But the earliest contracts were paying $800 a megawatt hour to the generators, right? So 80 cents per kilowatt hour.
Oh my God.
And then the average
I didn't make that.
80 cents. So we
insane.
and so a slew of contracts were given to big companies who are so if you drive down between Windsor and London, between London and Windsor in Ontario, you'll just see like wind turbine after wind turbine. And so they got locked into these 20-year contracts where they were guaranteed 80 cents a kilowatt hour, regardless of the price of electricity.
Oh my goodness. And
so those contracts expired, and then the next ones were 40 cents and then 20 cents, and then it eventually leveled off. But that disparity, the mismatch, was saddled on top of the rates that everybody has to pay. So everybody in Ontario is paying essentially the cost of your electricity, which is transformation, generation, and operations, plus your portion of that promised revenue to those green energy providers. So
wow, so everyone basically got totally screwed.
Right. Which is why you don't see a lot of Bitcoin miners running to Ontario. It's the inverse. Like they have taxation issues too.
There's like a socialism, communist element to trying to control the energy markets. I mean, that's
it was by decree.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what did I assume the cost before was very low, and then what did you actually see the price per kilowatt hour that the average homeowner was paying?
Well, the price per kilowatt hour didn't change. They just added a new section in the bill called the global adjustment.
Oh, so they just try to, they're just playing financial accounting games, basically.
So, and it's like, I think a lot of Bitcoin miners operating at scale are familiar with the coincident peaks, right? Mm-hmm. Concept of, and a lot of utilities do this, but they build out capacity, it's to meet a certain demand. Uh-huh. And so when and the way you spread the cost out is, well, if we hit a peak on June the 7th and you were really ramping up and smoking hot that day, you're going to pay more than the guy next to you who shut down and so they try to average this out by having like the average 3 or top 5. But in Ontario, it was the top 3 coincident peaks. Your contribution of the demand on those days on average would dictate how much you pay that month or in global adjustment. Mm-hmm. So it caused the big industries to employ full-time energy managers to literally sit at a desk with one job to watch the demand and they had these models to predict if it was going to be a coincident peak day. Mm-hmm. And so they had, the ability to shut down the entire operations because that was the difference between making a profit and going bust.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. And so green energy transition in Ontario really, really exacerbated that problem.
Yeah. I mean,
but organically in the US, if it's not done by mandate or by law, and if it's really just cheaper to build it, and Bitcoin miners care a lot about the cost, then I think it's going to be a really big, important factor.
So yeah, I think that socializing and using government controls to try to force price controls and force this stuff to happen, I think is totally the wrong way to go about it, right? Mm-hmm. And you see the result of that; it just ends up costing everybody a lot more and hurting the economy in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. Taking money out of people's pockets. That being said, that organically, I think that it makes sense that over time these more renewable types of energy will just be cheaper, right? One of the concepts behind this that I can't remember the author of the book, Paul, maybe you can pull it up, but he really harps on this idea of marginal cost, right? Where like if you're drilling for gas and oil, like there's that ongoing cost of drilling for gas and oil, and then there's that ongoing cost of transporting it in trucks and then refining it and doing all of these things, and those costs just never go away because you always have to do that when you're using non-renewables. But when you're using renewables, right, you put that solar panel down after you built it and done it, there's the initial setup cost. But then after that, the marginal cost, the ongoing cost is very low, right? Mm. You get 30 years or 40 years, whatever it is of generation, right? I mean, it might, get a little worse over time, but largely there's not an ongoing cost there where that truck driver has to drop off that oil every single time.
Right.
So I think, is it Robert Hirsch? I think it might be somebody else, but I'm not positive. Maybe you can pull it up. I think he might touch on the topic, but there's a more well-known book about the concept of marginal cost of energy, green energy. I believe he is the author, and a lot of people. No, I think it's called. He also wrote the Green New Deal, I think. Which, a lot of stuff has been taken out of there. So type in the author of the Green New Deal. He has a couple other books, and again, like most things, you take. Ask who wrote the book about the Green New Deal. Or maybe the Green New Deal, they took a lot of his ideas. Here it is, Jeremy Rifkin. And he wrote the Green New Deal, Why We Need It, and How We Can Make It Happen. But also, he wrote a couple other books too. But I think what I gathered from his book, and again, I don't agree with everything. I read a lot of books, and I'll take certain bits and pieces of things that really speak to me that I might agree with, and there may be a lot of other stuff that I don't necessarily agree with. But I think he's definitely onto something when he talks about this concept of marginal cost, right? And when the free market gets better and better at things, right, we get more efficient. And I think we're starting to get there, right, where it does make sense, where it is cheaper to produce solar panels, it is cheaper to do wind energy, and that cost keeps coming down because of free market principles, right? Then it kind of makes sense, right? Mm. And then where naturally these things will outcompete, non-renewable energy sources, natural gas, all those things, just because it'll be cheaper, right? It'll be easier to mass manufacture. The science and technology behind the efficiency of the photovoltaic cells will get better. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think my experience was it wasn't a free market.
Yeah.
And we see the results. But I think the American, approach to it is much better. It's through incentives, and Bitcoin miners are the ultimate incentive, sort of highlighter.
Did you ever watch Gridless? I think it's like a Bitcoin documentary called Gridless. Have you seen it?
Is it about Gridless, the company?
I believe so.
Okay.
And then they're putting hydro centers in areas in Africa that there's really no incentive. There's these stranded populations and villages that have, they're living in terrible conditions, and there was no incentive for an energy provider to go in there and set up, say a 1 megawatt or 500 kW or whatever, right? And just because those people would only use 50 kW or whatever, they wouldn't. There was just no financial incentive there, or they didn't have the money to pay for that. But now they're setting up these little hydro centers, and Bitcoin miners, they know that if we set this up, they'll talk to a Bitcoin mining company, and hey, maybe 10% of that power goes to power the cell phones of the people, clean the water, do whatever needs to be done, give their little village power. But at the same time, they have a recurring revenue stream from the Bitcoin miner that's there. I think that is just a prime example of.
It's huge. And when people talk about renewable energy, in their minds, I think a lot of people are thinking about wind and solar, but hydroelectric generation it's the OG of the green energy. Yeah. And I love what the guys at Gridless are doing, and it costs money to set up infrastructure to generate electricity and then distribute it to the towns, or even if it's like around a little local village. And you need, every transaction needs a buyer and a seller, and there's an impediment because if there's no town, it's a catch-22. There's no town, there's nobody to buy it, so they can't build it. But if there was one, a town would flourish. So they're really unlocking a lot of potential there. And Bitcoin mining is like, I don't know, it's like economic growth as a service. Yeah. And I don't know what their plans are, but the idea, I guess, in my mind could be, you run it until the community is flourishing and self-sustaining. Exactly. And then you can maybe taper off to the point where you're eating up the excess energy, or maybe it fuels more development and growth. Like, why stop at 5 megawatts? Why not build 100 megawatts and have like a city? So I think it's going to be a catalyst for huge economic development throughout the world.
Could not agree more. Let's talk a little bit about just what mining is and what a pool is, and then we can set that up to talk about what makes ocean mining unique, or the ocean pool unique. So how would you explain mining to just the average person? Oh, yeah.
I was talking to Paul earlier, and it's like explaining Bitcoin or mining to the average person is way harder because the vocabulary is not there. Yeah. So I would say Bitcoin mining to the average person is using energy to solve a puzzle, right? You're using energy to solve a puzzle that helps validate the blocks in the blockchain. It's actually probably the hardest. It's like writing a long essay is much easier than writing a short essay.
Yeah, I think you're right.
But proof of work, expending energy, turning that energy into money, right? And doing so with the really just the mindset of growth and just creating revenue.
I like to use this analogy. What you're doing with mining in the digital realm is very similar to gold mining in the physical realm, where you have to expend, and we call it proof of work, right? So you have to expend this energy. If you're gold mining, you have to hire laborers, you have to dig into the ground, you have to use oil or gas or whatever to extract this metal from the earth, right? And it adds this concept of a cost of production to the asset, right? Because if you're a gold miner and you mine for gold and you get 5 bars of gold, and it costs you X amount of dollars per se to do that, you're not going to sell those 5 bars of gold for less than what it cost you to extract them, right? There's this idea of, a cost of production, make this profit incentive on that. And I think Bitcoin mining and mining in general, proof of work, is the same thing in the digital realm. You're trading this energy, this electrical energy, electrons. You're trading them for issuance of, Bitcoin, for example. So when we talk about a pool, initially there weren't any pools when people started Bitcoin mining, and Satoshi had this vision of, one CPU, one vote. But eventually, Bitcoin mining got so difficult and scarce that, if you only had one machine, you might not, solve that mathematical puzzle with your energy for a month or weeks at a time, right? So this idea of pools where people would work together and split the rewards to have a more regular, compensation from the blockchain. Is that how you would explain a pool?
Yeah, the pool is the thing that solves for cash flow, right? So you mentioned Satoshi's sort of vision, I guess, in the paper. I was reading through it the other day, and he doesn't actually refer to miners, right? He refers to nodes, and there's like several times the phrase "honest nodes" pops up, and every time I would encourage anyone listening to reread the white paper, but every time you see the word node or honest node, replace it with the word miner. And the miners have such like an important job in that process. But yeah, again, the concept of the pool didn't exist back then. So that, but like you said, the pool is really in the early days, or the concept of the mining pool in the early days, one CPU, one vote. Miners would, and this was way before my time, by the way, but you would run a Bitcoin node, you would run a full node, you would have your local mempool, and you would relay transactions. And there was a tab or a button on the interface for mining. And so if you wanted to mine, you could just use your CPU power to mine the local mempool that you were creating. And if you got lucky, you would win 50 Bitcoins.
Yeah.
And that quickly turned into 25 Bitcoins. And in that process, the probability or likelihood of you getting any money was drastically declining,
because they had so many more
people were seeing this as an opportunity,
which is good.
Which is great. Yeah. So to some of the newcomers, people that I meet, I try to use the office lottery example, right? Because anybody who's working in an office participates in, hey, chip in $5. We're going to get everybody on the floor to chip in $5, and we'll buy like 20 lottery tickets. And if we win, we'll split it up evenly.
Yeah.
And that's essentially what a mining pool is. It's you could sit there and play by yourself and have a much lower probability, but much higher reward. Because miners in the early days were doing it for hobby, and they weren't spending, tens of thousands of dollars on electricity, that quickly turned into enterprise operations where miners had big electric bills. So the idea of joining a pool became almost mandatory. And so if you look at the history of the evolution or the origins of pools, we quickly went from a lot of solo mining to a lot of pools and barely any solo mining.
I often think about the game theory of Bitcoin's design, right? Where when it first launched, it was very beta, and there was really no fiat value. It wasn't a market price yet. So the network was more centralized. There was only a few participants, but it didn't have any economic value per se, right? Aside from the early Cypherpunk community around it that was believing the technology. It was more, ethos based, and there was not like you could go and sell it and trade it for any other fiat currency at the time, right? And it was more centralized, and it was very beta. But as the network grew and it got that market price, right? There was this financial incentive to bring in more security, which signals to the market, hey, there's a profit, to be made here, there's potential here. And the network has grown and grown and grown. And as it's grown, the security around the network has grown via the miners of the world participating at larger and larger scale. So it's a fascinating concept that I think about a lot. And
Yeah.
she really thought out all these things.
It's really interesting. You mentioned that some of the early OGs before the market, before there was a market, there was no opportunity to trade it for US dollars. So probably a lot of the early cypherpunks and Bitcoiners were the first ones to make the transition into a unit of account. Like, so one of my colleagues, Ocean's co-founder, Luke Daster, he's I think in his mind, he's already made that shift where like a Bitcoin is a Bitcoin. Like it's not $70,000. It's not $66,000. It's just a Bitcoin. And if your first exposure to Bitcoin was there was no fiat equivalent, I think it's easier to do that because that's what you're used to.
Yeah.
But most of us coming into it as a means to off ramp into USD, then it's a harder transition.
Makes sense. So let's talk about how pools have historically worked and operated with Stratum V1, which is the type of pool that pretty much everybody runs right now. What are the downsides of the current model? What are the risks of the current model? And then we can segue that into talking about what Ocean's doing.
Sure.
Stratum V2.
Yeah. So traditional pool models where again the mining is broken up into there's like brute force, and then there's the creative, intelligent design that happens. And both of those things are what Bitcoin mining is. I probably should have put that in the other answer. But the first evolution of mining pools, which, by the way, I'll mention it later, but Ocean's predecessor is Ocean V1 essentially was a pool called Eligius. And that was the second mining pool ever created back in 2011.
Wow.
Yeah, that's when we were going to launch Ocean. We initially were going to call it Eligius because it's a continuation of the other pool, but we did a rebrand. But essentially, pools in the early days were solving for cash flow on behalf of the miners, and the creative component of that design of the mining was transferred to a centralized entity. So pools, basically in the early days, they were all centralized as far as I know, and they would run nodes on their servers. They would build their local mempools. They would design, and they would set filter policies and design blocks. And then once they had that work packaged up, they would send it to the miners over Stratum V1 and the protocol. And so Stratum V1 is the protocol by which the miners communicated with Bitcoin through the pools, and it worked really well because it accomplished what miners needed, which was cash flow. And I think it's been a great tool, and I don't think there was any other protocols in play at the time, but there's been this slow transition to sort of like fix some of the obvious problems with it, like encryption is a big one as well, and Stratum V1 is not encrypted, and so which is why we use Signal instead of text messaging for our communications, right? So the Bitcoin doesn't have that currently under Stratum V1. So there's that, and there's the issue that I think has been gaining a lot of traction over the last few years. Just this realization that you can have 1 million miners around the world, but if they're all doing the work that was literally designed by one person, is Bitcoin decentralized? Is because if you can't decentralize all of it, right? Can you decentralize any of it? And
just to encapsulate what you're saying here, the original idea was one CPU, one vote, right? But now that we have pools, there could be, and we're not using CPUs anymore. Let's just use that as the example. Say there's 1,000 people with each have one CPU, just to keep things simple, right? It's no longer one CPU, one vote. It's 1,000 CPUs, and whoever's running the pool has the one vote. Is that, or they have the 1,000 votes that they can make however they see fit?
Yeah, whichever way you look at it, but that's entirely correct. Yeah, okay. It's the best way to think of the modern pool relationship is the pool is the Bitcoin miner essentially.
Yeah,
right, and the miners, the people who call themselves miners, are just hashers, because if Bitcoin mining is involves this creative component and the hashing, it's sort of like a parent-child relationship. The pool's making the decisions about what goes in the blockchain. They're giving the work to the miners, and the miners do the work. But what's more is the way most pools operate today. It's even, I would say, like, it removes the miners from the equation even further from Bitcoin, because every Bitcoin block has a generation transaction, which is the mechanism by which new Bitcoins are kind of like created, right? And so the when a block is found, the Coinbase or the generation transaction has an input, right? And it's got an output. And the input is the Coinbase, and the output is the output address of the pool. So the pool collects the subsidy and transaction fees from the network, and then their miners that are on the pool, they pay them out from like most likely an alternative, source of funds. So miners aren't even getting money directly from Bitcoin; they're getting it from the pool, and then the pool is turning around and basically, you can think of a pool. We're really familiar with the concept of hosting because it's really popular now, where you have one guy operating a site, but he's hosted the machines out to. He's hosting machines that were purchased by 1,000 guys. A pool is kind of the same thing. That the pool is the miner, and then all of the people behind the pool are just like, we're renting hash rate to the pool, and in exchange for that hash rate, the pool pays us a regular, daily, predictable amount. And then behind the scenes, the pool is settling up with Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is a highly variance thing, right? Like, you may go 10 days without a block, or you may hit 4 blocks in 1 day. But regardless of what happens, the pool pays the miners. So they've created this a buffer, I guess, between Bitcoin and the miners, whereas there's a lot of just like absorption of variance that goes into the pool. So pools, I guess, have just grown in scope and grown in authority. The fact that Satoshi didn't even have the word miner in, I think he referred to gold mining, but he didn't have the word miner referring to what a miner is. And the white paper certainly didn't envision the pool, and the fact that the pools have sort of grown to have way more control now than they ever used to. I think that's the problem that's been motivating a lot of people to work on the Stratum V2 upgrades and other things.
He did know that eventually GPUs and more intensive computing would come about and participate, and that there would be concentrations of individuals with many CPUs or GPUs, right? He kind of did talk about that in a lot of his posts and sort of predict that. He was just trying to delay that. He did want to delay that as long as possible,
right.
And to his credit for all the crazy game theory he thought through, maybe he didn't quite go this far and really think big enough that it would become what it is today. So I'm sure he's wherever he is, he's very, very, very astonished and surprised by what's become of his invention.
For sure.
So let's talk about you kind of raised some issues with Stratum V1. We discussed that. Let's talk about what Ocean Mining is working on and a variation of Stratum V2 and why that's important.
Yeah, sure. I'll just tie it into the origin story just a bit. Okay. Ocean is a newish mining pool launched in November 28th of last year. But it's actually a relaunch of an older pool called Eligius. And so in the beginning of the mining, I think the first pool that entered the scene was Slush Pool, that rebranded into Brains, but they first came on as Slush in early 2011, and about 4 months later, Eligius popped up on the map. And so Luke Daster, legendary Bitcoin developer, was the creator of Eligius, and Luke ran Eligius for until about 2016, 2017 as a hobby pool, initially by himself, and then with one other guy who's also part of the Ocean team. His name's Jason. He was going to try to come with us today, but couldn't make it. But together it was a Batman and Robin tag team, and they they were two really smart dudes, and they grew Allegius to 20% of the network hash rate.
Oh, wow.
Or just over 20%. So the equivalent of, I don't know if it would be F2 Pool or Foundry today, but they did it it was a bit of a hobby. It's always fun listening to Luke. People ask, why did you start the pool in the first place? He's like, I don't know, because it was a hobby, or it was fun at the time. It was, again, it was just Cypherpunk back then.
Yeah. You can say that as a developer, as someone who's messed around with different pools for different things and tried. I mean, it is you got to stabilize things. You got to have backups. I mean, something goes down, it's a disaster. I mean, there's a lot of factors. So
So to make
we got to get Luke on here sometime.
He's close, so you should. Yeah, he'll drive down, or you may have to drive up. But so they ran that pool they had like a decade of dominance where it was, you had other pools jumping on the scene and again growing in scope, and hash rate was massively increasing, and it was Luke and Jason, really a tag team, operating at 20% of the network, and the core design features of Ocean today are really just a very like similar reflection of how Allegius was back then. But eventually the pool, there were other companies were coming onto the scene and spending like VC money and making it very institutional. And they had things like websites and customer service reporting and compliance reporting, and more sophisticated clients start demanding those things. So, so their hobby project that, was legendary, ended up sort of getting put on the shelf, and Luke went back to fight the block size wars, and Jason went on to become a world renowned Tesla hacker, which you got to have him on one day to tell that story.
Oh yeah, we definitely want to hear that story.
It's probably two of the smartest guys I know. And anyways, Allegius gets put on the shelf around like 2016. Luke goes back to Bitcoin full time. He never left, but he was exclusively focusing on that. And so years later, how long was it? So 2023-ish. So about 6 years later, I come to know Luke through a family connection, and we kind of like the birth of Ocean was me, Luke, and Ian, the other co-founder, talking about and reflecting on this issue of centralization. And I used to attend, again, my entry into the space was late 2021. I used to attend a lot of, or watch a lot of talks and attend conferences. And when the topic of Bitcoin decentralization came up, it was like, it seemed like a bit of hand waving, like, oh no, it's fine because Bitcoin mining is happening in this country and that country and Africa and Italy and all of America, China, Kazakhstan. It's not centralized. It's so decentralized. But, we were peering into like what's actually happening. And when you look at mining as if you look at the anatomy of mining as being two parts, there's the hashing and then there's the design, you quickly realize that the design is it's not geographically dispersed. It's not dispersed among hundreds of people. It's really a handful of people.
Yeah, 5 or 6 of the top.
5 or 6, CEOs control every block that Bitcoin mines today. And so
questionably, some of those CEOs might be controlled by one CEO.
Yes, and there was a presentation that was on this very subject in Nashville this week. It really exposes it. Yeah. But so our sort of inspiration to relaunch Ocean came from this really firm belief that mining at the pool level is extremely centralized, and it's an impediment for growth, and it's kind of like one of these. It's a risk to the system.
In my opinion, it's probably the largest risk left. The last argument that could be made,
right?
Is this full centralization?
Yeah,
that I see as almost an attack surface.
So so Luke had this vision of one day bringing back Allegius, and it was really like, well, Bitcoin needs it more now than it ever has, and the pool software was there, and the pool was successful back in the day. So we relaunched Allegius as Ocean, with the main mission of introducing more decentralization at the pool level. And so even though Ocean launched as a centralized pool, like decentralization is not somewhere you get to overnight. You have to start somewhere and then basically break it up. So we launched Ocean as a centralized pool with other features that make it, less controlling by us, but with the mission and the vision of moving essentially all of the creative decision-making authority out of our hands into the hands of the miners. So, and we're almost there. Like, it's been 8 months and we're almost there.
How much longer do you think you have to go to you're finally at the end product? Is it something that's always going to be in development, or is this something that you feel that, you'll be 99.8% of the way there and you only won't have to do much once you reach this goal? Do you see it as that?
We have a roadmap of features and different, phases of products. But the first one is decentralized block template creation. Bob Burnett talks a lot about this as well. But when miners are making their own blocks, the problem of or the risk of censorship goes away. You still have elements of, in improvement areas, but really that's the benchmark we need to hit. So instead of the pool running a mempool, running our local node and creating our mempool with our policies, you as a miner, you can run your node, build your mempool with your policies and preferences, and commit your hash rate to it. And that decentralized block template creation, we're probably a few weeks away from alpha testing with some of our larger miners, and then several more weeks, potentially months. I'm not the one coding, so it's easy for me to sit here and
weeks
say.
always turn into months. That's what I've realized over the years.
Yeah, we've we've hit all of our promises in terms of like timing so far, so that's great.
Shocking.
But I would say, we're very, very close from having this be available to the public, and it's going to be a little bit more of a technical lift, but it's compared to what miners already do, it's not crazy. And we're going to try to integrate with existing software service providers to make it so that it's super easy and super streamlined. And if you're using, some software and you want to mine on Ocean, click this button, and then you can like run a local instance of the Bitcoin node on your device. Mm-hmm. And then you can build your mempool, your local mempool, and then design your block. And that's basically the holy grail right there.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit more about this concept of templates. I know there was some controversy early on when you guys first launched, something about inscriptions or ordinals or whatever. Maybe you can talk to our audience a little bit about that and talk about your opinion and explain the templates a little bit to us.
Sure. Yeah. So the controversy early on when we launched was around the concept of the op return data in every Bitcoin block transaction, and every node has a set of filter policies it runs, and Bitcoin Core by default has a more lenient policy for this data, and Bitcoin Knots which is the other implementation of the code, has a less lenient implementation. So it's more strict. It only allows 42 bytes of data versus 80 bytes of data. So when we launched the pool, every pool uses a node, right? Like Foundry has a node, Ample has a node, we have a node, right? So we chose to use the upgraded version of the Bitcoin Knot software, which by design restricts more of the data. So the inscriptions, the ordinals, they don't make it into the blocks, right? And so that's where a lot of the controversy started.
So what was the thought process behind this? Because as a miner, don't you normally want to have as much as you can put in that block is more financial incentive, right? Is that the idea? So for the miner, mm-hmm. Yeah. So like I guess there's a few different ways to look at it, but the issue of profitability and revenue, it's actually been debunked for the most part. Like we've been running studies, the Ocean's blocks and nodes versus standard core templates. It's within like 0.1, 0.2% difference. Okay.
Overall. So the profitability is of the block itself is basically it's roughly the same.
Okay.
So which was a big piece of FUD early on, because a lot of people who were sort of criticizing Ocean early on were saying, well, your blocks are gonna earn less, therefore your miners will make less money.
Yeah.
but the actual reverse has happened. So the blocks subsidy has actually evened out quite a bit. But because Ocean has like disintermediated the mining process to a large extent, like miners get paid directly from the blockchain. It doesn't go into our coffers and then to the miners. A lot of our miners have actually told us privately that they're making more money on Ocean than they did on their other pools.
Interesting.
And in some cases, double-digit percentages.
Wow. That's pretty wild.
Yeah, higher revenues. We have a pretty good understanding of what's happening behind the scenes, but I think the FPPS payout system that we know is sort of dying, and it will be unsustainable in the future. But where were we right before we got onto inscription?
I guess I'm just trying to understand the logic of why when you guys launched, you picked this nonce template over a core template. What was the rationale behind it?
Well, like it's every pool has to run a node because they got to generate a mempool to design a block, and every pool, right? One CPU, one vote, right? In today's day and age, the miner is, that it's their choice essentially. It's the pool's choice, and so Luke and us, we decided to use knots because we believe that it was the best thing for Bitcoin in the sense of increasing the number of financial transactions or maximizing and optimizing financial transactions into Bitcoin. And initially really didn't see it as a potential issue. It kind of caught us by surprise, the storm of backlash.
Was it like a political decision because you don't like ordinals or inscriptions? Was that kind of like the logic there, or what?
No, it was there is that element to it, but it wasn't. It's kind of like when, how much thought does another pool give to what kind of node that they run? Like, I think a lot of pools run Bitcoin Core by default just because it's the most popular pool.
Yeah.
Right. So there was concern. And again, I'll get into sort of where we went there in terms of the evolution, but everybody has to do what they think is, I guess, right for the network. And so there was, the individuals at Ocean, we were concerned about the utility of Bitcoin as a peer-to-peer electronic payment system, because if peer-to-peer transactions can't make it into the blockchain, then what good is its utility and as a blockchain? And so our decision was again this is all transitory, right? So
that's a whole nother rabbit hole we could go down.
But we launched the pool. You got to start centralized. The holy grail is decentralization, right? So miners make their choice, and then there's this transition period where as we're making the tools and technology to get to where we want to go, somebody has to create the block template. Yeah. Right. Because somebody has to create it. So given the option of having one that permits a lot of inscriptions that hurt the financial transactions, and given one that gives preference to financial transactions at the expense of inscriptions, the fact that they're both about the same in terms of revenue, it was like, it wasn't even like, it was a conscious decision, but it wasn't one that we expected to create a lot have a lot of controversy over. Yeah, because they both pay about the same. Like, gotcha. Like when you think of trying to get a transaction into the blockchain, right? As the fees rise, everybody pays more. So taking a few high-paying inscriptions out and replacing them with a few high-paying financial transactions has the effect of canceling themselves out. So That was a theory we had, and then we started looking at the data, and it was like, all right, this is like, what's all the fuss? Like, miners aren't making less money, but they're actually making more money. Ton of controversy early on, and it was, and it's due to this, this sort of like circumstance of somebody having to make that call. Right. So, we did what we thought was best for Bitcoin when it was our turn to make the call. But eventually, and probably several weeks away from now, we'll be in a position that everybody gets to make that vote. And so miners on Ocean will continue to educate. Obviously, personally, I would definitely like to give preference to financial transactions, but that decision is out of my hands and it's into the hands of the miners.
And I think that's the end game goal, right? So you mentioned now you have 4 templates that miners can pick from.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about what a template is exactly? Can you describe
sure.
the concept of a template? How easy is it for miners to implement? And how many, theoretically, there could be hundreds of templates that exist. Is that accurate statement to make?
Yeah, so there could be hundreds, but ideally there would be thousands or millions of templates because every miner would be making their own unique template. Mm-hmm. So Bitcoin, you can do a lot of, there's filters that you set, and there's a lot of manipulation that's possible when designing the block template. But you run a local mempool, right, on your node. And I think most nodes today probably have the capacity for about 300 blocks worth of transactions. So you have 300 blocks worth of transactions sitting on your node, right? Or the pools node in this case. Mm-hmm. And then you have to pick 1/300th of those to put in your next block. Uh-huh. And so there are, the easiest thing to optimize for is the fees, right? So make the block as hot, as heavy and rich as possible. But there are many other considerations that go into it. You can prioritize for transactions that have been sitting sort of in your local mempool for the longest period of time. So somebody paid a fee and they were waiting to get it in, but it's been a super long period of time. So the operator of the block template can say, I'm going to take those 10 transactions and stuff them in the block because those guys have been waiting the longest.
So that would just be kind of like a form of altruism to the network if you so decide.
Sure. You could have transactions of your own that if you're running a business and it relies on Bitcoin because Bitcoin is money, mm-hmm. and you want certainty over how much you're going to spend for your business, and we saw fees spike with at the halving with runes.
There are pools that do this, I think, right now, where they put their own transactions in.
There are pools that do that. So the point is that when people like running a node and designing a block gives the user of the block an incredible amount of control of what goes in it, mm-hmm. When you're the one designing it, the concept of maximizing the fees may not be the most important thing to you. Like you may want to have 10 transactions a month that you get into the blockchain. So your transactions would go into your block, right? And you would be motivated that because it probably benefits you in other ways, right? You could be altruistic, but the point is that there is a process to do this, and there's a lot of flexibility in running the nodes. And so most miners and Bitcoiners don't have a lot of familiarity with this because the concept of setting these policies and these filters have been gone from Bitcoin for like the better part of a decade, and it's only now starting to make a bit of a resurgence. But to your last point about having hundreds of nodes and hundreds of policies, definitely like. If every pool was running the same policy, right, and every block would look essentially the same regardless of who found it, and there's no diversity in that, and it's not how the origins were. And so, if every miner in the world was designing their own block, they could customize it according to their preferences. And we know no two mempools are identical because of latency. And so we're going to have like the main motivation here is censorship resistance. But in order to be censorship resistance, you have to look different. Like you can't all be running the same thing with the same policy, mm-hmm. because if you shut one down, then you're shutting them all down.
That's an interesting take. It really is. And I think, this really goes back to Satoshi's vision, which was one CPU, one vote. So there's lots to digest there. Let's talk a little bit about Ocean's non-custodial approach, right? Because usually the experience on a pool is that the pool takes custody of mined Bitcoin, and then PPLNS, PPS, or whatever it distributes by the share contribution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, real quick, I forgot your last question, which was the template. So we currently have 4. So again, we launched with 1. It was a temporary thing until we were decentralized. We got hit pretty hard over it, so we sort of accelerated we offered multiple templates sort of as a way to bridge the gap.
Love that.
So we currently have 4. We have Ocean's default, which we know what it is. It filters inscriptions. We have the core standard template. So the idea is, and then we have 2 that are sort of variations in the middle of that. Or I think 1 is more extreme than the default. But the point is, if you're an inscription lover and you want to be on Ocean, then mind the core policy. And if you want to prioritize financial transactions, mind the default policy. But we're giving people what we thought was as much of a spectrum to reflect what's currently available in Bitcoin as a bit of a stopgap until this next phase, which when we enter into the next phase, we won't need to do that anymore because everybody can do it themselves. So
I like that.
So yeah, non-custodial approach. So we launched as one of the core designs of Eligius was that it was non-custodial, and so we wanted to keep that characteristic in Ocean, and essentially what behind the scenes what that means is, and custodianship is a legal definition, not sort of like a practical definition. There's a lot of Twitter arguments about that, but essentially
there's a lot of Twitter arguments about it.
About everything, but yeah. But essentially when Ocean finds a block, in the generation transaction where the new coins are minted essentially has an input, which is called the coin base, and it has an output. And in the output on every other pool, the output is the Bitcoin address of the pool.
Of course.
And so the if it's 3.125 plus transaction fees, that money goes to the pool. It goes into their wallet. They take custody of it.
Yeah.
And then the miners that are on the pool are paid every day from some source in that organization. But there is a custody that occurs but by the pool. Ocean's approach, we're just leveraging the feature that exists in Bitcoin to be able to pay miners directly from the generation transaction. So when our blocks are found, the input is still our coin base, and the output, instead of having one Bitcoin address corresponding to Ocean, we have 16 output addresses.
So like if there's 16 different miners, each one is the individual miner.
Yes, and we have
15 plus your fee, right?
Yeah.
I assume you guys have one of the addresses is 1% or whatever the fee rate is for Ocean. Sent there.
Sort of, yeah. I'll explain. Right now we're 0%, but we will be, turning on fees very soon. But there's 16 outputs. The 15 correspond to the 15 largest miners on the pool, which represent well over 95% of the money that gets distributed, and the remaining goes to a wallet that Ocean receives, and then we basically immediately spend it to in a follow-up transaction to miners that are above the payout threshold but weren't part of that top 16.
So why only 16? Is that part of the way the code base was designed? Is it so she limit that to
16
addresses, or could you
back in the day, I think Luke and Jason's largest Coinbase on Eligius was 900 addresses.
Wow.
So it's a problem with Bitmain's firmware essentially. Okay. So if you try to send anything more, I forget the number of bytes, but anything more than 16 addresses, it chokes the ant miners and they crash. So, What's miners on the other hand don't do that. So they have, it's all in the firmware design. I believe Avalons are good. All of the aftermarket firmwares like Brains and Luxor and Vanish, they're all great. Epic is another good one. But because most of the world uses Bitmain stock firmware, and we're running a centralized pool currently, we have to give one size that fits all. So we have to assume that any block that is found by an ant miner, and so we have to limit it. But
so Bitmain needs to fix this then, essentially, is what you're saying.
It would be great. It would be great if they did, because it would allow us to pay more. But we're implementing fingerprinting technology soon, which will allow as the miner, whatever miner communicates with the pool, we'll have the miner knows what it is. You know, I'm an S19 or I'm running this firmware version, whatever it is. Once we have that data, we can actually assign more work. If we know that it's a firmware that can handle a larger coin base, we can give it more a larger coin base.
That's very cool.
So once we have this ready, I think it's going to be really cool to see. And we've been testing it on testnet, and I think Jason's gotten to like 400 output addresses on a What's miner. So the goal is people get paid directly from Bitcoin, because those are virgin Bitcoins. They haven't been touched by anybody.
Absolutely.
And I've heard miners, you know, and a lot of people speculate that there will or already is a premium on those coins.
I've heard that as well.
Yeah. So, and the fact is that you get it direct from the network. It doesn't go through hands that you don't know, and it's more auditable because you can see the paper trail. On the blockchain right down to the Coinbase, and you can pair that up to what you've mined. But contrasting that with the traditional pool model is totally, you know, custodial, and you're not making money from the Coinbase. The pool gets the money from the Coinbase, and then out of like another bank account, essentially the pool pays the miner based on a formula that they use.
So let me ask another question. When these payments are coming out of a block that's been essentially mined, is there like what's the fee on all those little different transactions? Is there something in the system that allows those with no fee?
Those essentially the generation transaction doesn't charge a fee. So
Really?
So those are there's no transaction fees associated with that.
Does that mean there's less space in that block for other transactions and rewards, or no?
It's such a small amount compared. It doesn't really have any effect on.
So there would be no concern, essentially, for someone who has maybe 5 miners, right? Their reward is not very high, right? So to send a transaction after it reached the pool, there might be a fee associated with that. With this, it's coming right to their wallet. Virgin, there's essentially no fee there. So there's no constraint there for a small miner.
Oh yeah, like if the miner has to pick up the tab for the pool paying them their reward. Yeah. That's a good point. I haven't actually thought about that.
Glad I could make you think today.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, so there's lots of ways that I think anytime you put a middleman in any system, a complex system, usually results in less profit for the person at the end of the line. And traditional pools are a huge middleman in Bitcoin mining. And all we're trying to do is get out of the way.
Okay.
Like,
makes sense.
Right. And there's a lot of services that they're doing which sort of explain where the money's going. But if the miners get, if there's 3.125 Bitcoin, Ocean right now is charging 0%. So all of that goes to the miners, and there's not an ounce more available, and nobody can create it out of thin air. That's the beauty of Bitcoin.
Okay.
So non-custodial is what Eligius was, what Ocean currently is, and how we will always be, even when we're decentralized.
Love that. That's fantastic. Again, this is a major concern for a lot of smaller miners. They come to our meetup, that we talk to them, and it's like, they might only take a payout from the pool once a month, right? Because you can't be doing maybe you have 1 or 2 machines and it made, $5 worth of Bitcoin for the day, or $3 worth of Bitcoin, and the fee's $3 or $2, right? So you can't send that transaction from the pool every day. You might have to wait to do it only once a month, or also eat into,
And we have a preset limit for essentially the secondary payouts of a million sats, basically.
Okay.
So we don't want to send anything below that, because in the future, you could be eating up the value of your UTXO with high fees. So keeping it relatively high is intentional. But we've also implemented Lightning payouts over Bolt 12.
Okay, that was my next question.
Okay, so and we have a lot of pleb miners on Ocean. I think there's like 500 or 600 miners, and many of those are plebs and running us either. I actually just hooked up a BitX with my kids yesterday.
Oh, wow.
So I'm one of them now. And
you're playing the lottery.
Yeah. No, I know. So BitXs are by default lottery mining. I think it's on public pool, but you can configure them pretty easily to Ocean.
Okay.
And so I did that, and I think I earned 35 sats, which I did the math. Somebody came out with a fidelity prediction of of $1 billion of one Bitcoin is $1 billion by 2038. And I did the math, and if I just keep this BitX plugged in for 10 years, it'll have earned $1.2 million on Ocean. So that's like predictable money.
That's a very optimistic projection from Fidelity.
Yeah, I know. So, and it was just fun because it's just sitting there in the wall, not doing anything. But yeah, Lightning Payouts were, we released that a couple of months ago, and essentially allowing miners still in a non-custodial fashion to receive payouts directly into a Lightning channel from the pool. So there's a cryptographic signing that happens on our website that miners can verify that the owner of the Lightning or the creator of the Lightning invoice offer is also the same person who holds the private key for the Bitcoin address that has been mining on the pool. And a core concept in this is the fact that we're a permissionless pool. So there's no accounts. There's no concept of an account. And it's actually a really entertaining process to go through when you're talking to a new miner.
Yeah.
Because they're so used to being like KYC'd up the wazoo and being getting permission from the pool, and then the pool gives them this account name, right? And in your interface, you have the pool URL, and then you have the worker. And so when Ocean, like there's no accounts, so the worker is just a Bitcoin address. Like you have a cold card, you have a Bitcoin address. You have a Jade, you got a Bitcoin address. So you plug it in there and hit activate, and then we start sending work to the miner. And then when rewards happen, they go to the Bitcoin address that you plugged in. So you fat finger it, and that's kind of a bit of a problem. But converting that over into Lightning, we implemented basically encryption signing signing a message with the private key of your Bitcoin address that contains the information on the Lightning invoice that you just submitted. And that way we know that you're the same person, or the same entity controls that key. And so instead of waiting till miners reach the million sat threshold for those secondary payments, they just go every block we find. For the folks who have set up Lightning, they'll get a Lightning payment. I don't believe we have a limit rate, like a minimum right now. So it could be 35 sats.
Okay, well,
and so sats will trickle into your Lightning channel.
Very cool.
Yeah.
How has your experience in customer relations and stakeholder management translated to the Bitcoin mining industry, particularly in terms of miner relations, right? Because, the pool's growing hash. There's so many miners, we're a finicky bunch, right? We want this, we want that. Some people might want this. Talk to me a little bit about that process, right? Bringing people onto the pool.
Yeah. So my account management, customer relations has been like a big passion of mine throughout the years. And it's translated over. So we essentially have a pretty company-wide policy understanding that we will go to the end of the world for each and every miner that is on the pool, that regardless of size. So it's, we try to personalize it as much as possible. And, anybody writing into mining at ocean.xyz is going to get an email back within probably seconds from Bitcoin Mechanic and, offering bespoke service. But, Jason Hughes, the VP of engineering, and we flew out to New Mexico about a month ago to visit one of our miners who was having trouble with his Starlink connection that was causing like intermittent outages and reduced hash rate. So just treating miners like people and not like numbers. And it's not like we're not at thousands of people. Like there's 500 people, and most of them you have a pretty good time. So yeah, it's the number one most important thing to us.
Nice. I love to hear that. And let's close out with this final question. Jack Dorsey has invested with you guys and put some money to the seed round of Ocean. How has he played into the founding of this company? What's his role? What is he working on? Because I know him, and I think he was doing something with Elon, a big mining thing. Is all of that hash going to be going towards Ocean's pool eventually? What's the plan there?
So the integration of Jack was quite a fascinating story. So Luke and Ian and I, we've started the company, and as any entrepreneur knows, like the first thing you do is you go raise some money, right? And to start a seed round and get a pitch deck together. And Luke and I were comparing notes of like, who do you know? Like, right. And his list was like this long because he's a Bitcoin celebrity. And I was like not there. and Jack was on his list, and so we set up. They've known each other from their Bitcoin throughout the years, and Jack has openly said that he's been a big fan and admirer of Luke. So we quickly got a call set up, and we pitched him on the idea of decentralizing the mining pools, and he loved it. Like from day one, it was like consistent with his efforts at Block in terms of trying to break up the monopoly that Bitmain has and creating more decentralization on the hardware space. So he was a very quick yes, and a very strong advocate and supporter and coach as well. So like he's basically sort of there whenever we need to sort of ask questions or seek advice, and so it's been phenomenal. And actually the whole reason we have the name Ocean is because of Jack. So the name was Elegius, right? And Paul, if you're listening, you try to type it. I'd be really curious to see what you come up with. But
I would say like Elegius, Elegius. That's how I spell it.
So you're well read, so you're pretty darn close. But right. It's Eligius. But we were on a strategy call. We were on a strategy call with Jack, and he asked the question. He said, "You're going to announce this thing at a conference or something." We're like, "Yeah, right." And he's like, "Okay, you're going to tell people about this. What are they going to type into Google?" He literally said, "What are they going to type into Google?" And we're like, "Well,
hopefully not. They're not going to type in. If they're listening to this podcast, they're not going to type anything into Google, because of how corrupt Google is."
So, and the point being was, me, Luke, and Ian, we all said the name differently. I said Elegius, Luke said Eligius, Ian said Elegius.
Yeah.
And then hearing it, does it start with an A? Does it have a G? Does it have a J? And so he gave us probably the single best piece of advice, which was you should consider a name change for a rebrand because you want the market to really recognize this thing. So a bunch of engineers and cypherpunks and developers went and became marketing wizards for about 1 to 2 weeks, and we came up with Ocean.
I think they should have called it Artemko. What do you think?
Yeah, Ocean is great because the Ocean is transparent, like Ocean is, and it's permissionless, right? Like anybody can jump in the ocean. We're here in Naples. We can just dive in, go right down to the pier.
I'm just messing with you because you said that nobody can pronounce your last name.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
That's why I said Artemko.
And most people say Artemko.
Artemko.
And I'm like, I don't get it.
So I went with something that was even harder than Elegius.
Yeah. No, but yeah, Jack's great. He's been a huge supporter. So and the other question about like they're part of open sourcing and everything is like I don't think anybody wants to have like mandates on where hash rate goes, right? But Block's whole thing is and it's completely separate, but they're building an open source ASIC. So I think that's still to be determined, but I'm hopeful that we'll get a lot of the hash rate, but
I read that they're partnering. He's partnering with Elon on something to do some huge facility with battery storage or something.
Okay.
So, I mean, that's going to be a massive mining facility potentially. So
that's going to be massive.
I'm curious if that hash power will be pointed. Will Jack put his money where his mouth is? That's what I really want to know.
Oh.
Have there been any discussions about that yet or no?
I don't know anything about that.
Okay.
So, and I think, how many years out is that?
I'm not sure, but Paul, maybe you can look that up. Look at the status of where Elon and Jack Dorsey's project to build a giant data center to mine Bitcoin. See if you can find the deets on that.
Yeah. So I could say I hope we get the hash rate, but who knows? It'll be the most permissionless option.
That is absolutely true from everything you've told us. So, absolutely excited to learn more about your pool and watch the growth of how it all plays out. What do you got here for us, Paul?
So, ChatGPT says that their project to build a solar-powered Bitcoin mining facility in Texas is progressing. The initiative could be up and running by the end of 2023, it says here. That's an old article.
Okay. So, obviously, the deadlines are not met. See if you can find how much hash power.
And here's the key part.
How many megawatts?
Here's the key part about Ocean, too. Because we're permissionless, we don't actually know who our miners are.
Okay.
Right. So all we see, and all the stats are completely open, all we see is Bitcoin addresses. So miners, I may know, you may tell me you're mining, but unless you say, hey, Mark,
This is my
that address, that's me,
Yeah.
I'll have no idea.
Gotcha.
Right. So, which is how we want to keep it too.
Yeah, I think that's for the best, right?
So
Reduces attack vectors. Yeah.
So it says here that their project Blockstream is expected to achieve a hash rate of approximately 30 petahashes per second. Does that speak to you?
I think that's an old project. I don't even know if that thing got off the ground.
Yeah, you're thinking of something else.
It may be the same thing, just kind of rekindled. But no, we have a good we have a good relationship, and the investment was definitely from the personal side, not through Block. So
Gotcha.
Just to make sure that's clear.
CNBC has more details. Scroll down. It says see it go up. Click right there. Yeah. Let's see what we got here. 3.8 Tesla's 3.8 megawatt solar PV array and 12 megawatt hour battery.
Yeah,
that's a smaller.
And that was pre-Ocean too.
Okay.
So I don't know if that ever got off the ground or not, but
yeah, that's looking at this as a much smaller size than I expected, but if it does get up and running, hopefully he will point his hash at the ocean.
Well, the approach we take is we need to earn it just like everybody else.
Of course, makes sense.
Yeah, for sure.
Mark Artymko, it's been a pleasure.
Hey, Maddie. Thanks, man.